My wife married my brother after I was declared dead, but I was never gone. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. Hey there, and welcome to a real story about betrayal. It was just another Friday evening, and we were winding down from the week at our regular spot, a scruffy little bar we affectionately called The Dive. The four of us were crowded around our usual table, nursing our drinks and listening to Danny Collins talk, again, about how he'd recently uncovered that his wife of 25 years had been unfaithful some time ago. The rest of the guys, Rick, James, and I, kept trying to console him, reminding him how brutal and expensive a divorce could be if he chose to go down that road. We'd all been tight since our military days, and they had welcomed me into their group not long after I showed up in their quiet coastal town. Each of us had served in the Marines, which is probably why we bonded as quickly as we did. I landed here more than 10 years back, after quite literally throwing a dart at a wall map and deciding to make a fresh start wherever it stuck. That dart pointed to the tiny town of Millport, a logging town nestled on the edge of the Pacific, population barely pushing 1,000. The nearest city was a good 35 minutes away. Once I got here, I started fresh. Through a newly formed offshore LLC, I bought the only grocery store in town, one of those all-in-one shops that carried everything from canned beans to fishing hooks, and I went all in. Within a year, I had tripled its size, added a gas station, and got licensed to sell beer, wine, and spirits. I was running a full operation with 8 full-timers and half a dozen part-time staff keeping the place going. After that, I bought a patch of land through a tax auction just on the outskirts of town and began building my home, a big log house that overlooked the entire village. My friends pitched in whenever they could, especially since they had connections at the mill and helped me source the logs directly at wholesale. I stripped the bark myself, saved a fortune, and before long, I had a cozy 3-bedroom place that felt like it belonged here more than I ever did. Back when we were all younger, Danny had landed a position with a major investment firm out of New York, and we all knew how much pride he took in what he'd built with his wife, Connie. That night, I was the last one to arrive at the bar, as usual. I tended to hang back, partly out of habit and partly because I always worried one of the guys' wives might try to bring someone along to introduce me to. It had become a bit of a running joke, whether I was single by choice or hiding something else, and their curiosity just added fuel to the small-town rumor mill. Connie, Danny's wife, happened to spot me pulling up in my old, lovingly restored Ford Ranchero, which I considered my prized possession. But something about the way she looked at me that night, it didn't sit right. There was an odd tension in the air, like something unsaid was hanging between us. My stepdad, Uncle Tom, used to shut down whenever I asked about my real dad. That was his way of dodging the truth, and I learned early on how silence could hide 1,000 things. Later that evening, something shifted inside me. When I saw my daughter again after all those years, I wrapped her in my arms like I was trying to make up for every moment we'd missed. She buried her face in my neck, and we both cried like time had folded in on itself. It had been 15 years since I held her like that. She was only 7 back then. And yet somehow that love had never faded. It had just been waiting. All the feelings I had buried deep down for so long finally erupted, and the emotions just came pouring out. We were both crying, loud, raw sobs, and I knew everyone nearby could hear. But at that moment I didn't care. No one judged us. They all knew something big had happened. The next day my grandfather sat down and watched the video, start to finish. I had never seen that kind of frustration on his face before. Not once in my life. His first reaction wasn't quiet, it was action. He picked up the phone and called my wife's father, Senator Raymond Thompson of Maine. He didn't hold back. He told the senator exactly what I had found, what I had recorded, and then I followed up by texting him the video myself. The fury in Senator Thompson's voice was unmistakable. He was disgusted. You could tell from his tone that he didn't think highly of what his daughter had done. He told my grandfather that he'd be on the next private jet out. Both men agreed. Nothing would be decided until the 3 of us, myself, the senator, and Joan, sat down face to face and laid everything out. That was the plan. Before that happened, though, my grandfather turned on the part of the recording where Joan was speaking. Her voice was calm. Too calm. There was no guilt in her words. None. No trace of remorse, not even a flicker of shame for what she had done or for being caught. That hit me harder than anything. My grandfather looked over at me. He saw the tears silently falling down my cheeks. My entire world felt like it was collapsing around me. He asked gently, "Do you love James?" Without hesitation, Joan answered, "Yes." That's when I found out, after I had caught them, James had proposed to her, and she had said yes. My grandfather shook his head slowly. So let me get this straight. James stole his younger brother's wife, tore apart a family and took his children, and now he wants to marry her? What kind of man does that to his own brother? And what kind of woman allows it? There was no answer. Just silence. Later that day, as I was trying to collect myself, I heard Jennifer, my buddy Steven's daughter, say with a soft chuckle, "Now that's the dad I remember." Bill and I walked back inside to grab a couple of cold drinks. He was still feeling the weight of his own situation, but now with a new understanding. "You blow me away," Bill said, shaking his head. "Here I was, drowning in my own pity last night after finding out my wife made some dumb choices, and you just sat there, calm and quiet. Now I get it. After everything you've gone through, my story feels like a footnote. Man, I see you in a whole new light. The way you handled all that. Are you ever going to tell her?" I smiled faintly but didn't answer. Some truths didn't need a spotlight. Later, I let her drive up the winding gravel driveway to my place, the one that climbs in tight switchbacks all the way up the hill. It was her first time handling a manual transmission, and the poor girl stalled out at least 5 times before we got to the top. I laughed until my sides hurt. It was such a simple moment, but honestly one I'd carry with me forever. Once we got inside, I fired up the wood stove to chase off the evening chill. Then I gave her the grand tour of the house. She brought in her bags and settled into what was now going to be her room. By the time we finished walking through the place, I could see it in her eyes. She had fallen in love with it just like I had when I first built it. My grandfather always believed, until the day he passed, that it had all been orchestrated. Joan and James had planned every bit of it. They counted on our families having too much at stake to risk public scandal. And, unfortunately, that bet paid off. Both families did everything they could to sweep it under the rug. That way Joan and James kept everything. Meanwhile, I watched my business bleed. She took the company public without my consent, converting my equity into diluted shares to raise capital they desperately needed, after they bled the reserve dry. They took my career, my family, my chance to start over with someone new. They boxed me in, locked the door, and forced me to play by rules I didn't agree to. Sure, I was technically free, but it was the kind of freedom that still came with chains. Does that make any sense? I asked aloud, not really expecting an answer. But somewhere deep inside I knew the truth. Yeah, I said to myself. It does. But the truth is, it was still my mistake. I could have said no. I could have walked away. I looked at her, then quietly said, "No." I didn't fight back. I didn't expose them. I chose to put the needs of both families ahead of my own. And with that, I walked away from the conversation, heading back into the computer room. I reached up to the built-in shelving and pulled down an old, heavy binder, one that had been sitting there untouched for years. It held the truth, all of it. But of course, neither Madison nor Derek, that's what I started calling them instead of Joan and James, were answering anyone's questions. Not the family, not the media, not even the legal teams. They'd gone silent, hoping it would all pass. One question kept getting thrown at them over and over again. Is our father still alive? Jennifer, my daughter, looked at me solemnly and said, "That second bombshell drops tonight." Apparently, those who'd seen what she planned to release were already stunned. From what I was told, the information painted a disturbing picture. That Derek and Madison had essentially erased me. That they'd manipulated everything to make it seem like I had vanished willingly, or worse. The records showed that the funds and shares I was promised had been routed through fake accounts, sent off to shell corporations that didn't even exist. It raised questions that chilled me to my core. Had they planned for me to disappear permanently? Jennifer promised to notify the right people. Her tone was steady, calm even, but I could tell she was barely holding it together. By Friday afternoon, news of everything she had revealed began making waves. Surprisingly, the stock that had plummeted from scandal began to rebound. It steadied around $35 a share and then started climbing. But while the numbers on Wall Street were recovering, my brother's world, Derek's world, was falling apart. A formal ethics investigation had been launched in the Senate. The press was relentless. Hour by hour, new voices joined the call for his resignation. And when he finally made a public statement, the only thing he repeated was that he and Madison hadn't become romantically involved until after I had supposedly died. He claimed their relationship blossomed out of mutual grief. What he didn't know was that he was now walking Madison down the aisle, into a storm. That moment still plays in my mind. I watched her, Madison, sitting beside him, beside Derek. If that really was him, then time had left its marks. He had the soft middle-aged frame now, with a noticeable bald spot he used to be so vain about. Jennifer and I sat quietly, watching as Madison rose from her seat and climbed the steps of the altar. She turned and for a second our eyes met. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Her hand flew up to her mouth as if she was trying to stop herself from crying out loud. For a moment, it looked like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. But believe it she would, because truth has a way of showing up whether you're ready for it or not. Then Judy, my second daughter, stood beside her. Jennifer was gracious despite everything. But Madison? She was in total shock. Her expression was like a mask cracking apart in slow motion. That's when Jennifer finally said the words that tore the last veil off everything. "Mom, you should know something," she said. "Dad didn't come looking for me. I found him. I had every bit of information about what you and Derek did. Dad didn't even know I was piecing it together. He gave me copies of the files, reluctantly, because I told him I wanted to show my sisters the truth." Her voice trembled only slightly. "He never tried to make himself look good. But I decided someone had to. I needed to prove he wasn't the weak, broken man you both made him out to be. What you and Derek did, that's not something you come back from. You didn't just betray him. You betrayed us. All of us." Madison's fury was written across her face, but for once she had nothing to say. The silence was heavier than any scream. Then came the part one never imagined I'd be part of again, the toast. As the best man and father of the bride, I stepped forward, holding my glass and doing my best to keep my voice steady. I tried to walk the line between honesty and grace. I spoke about the groom, my daughter's now husband, and how I'd come to care for him. Thanks to his wonderful parents who I consider dear friends, we formed a bond one never expected. In a way, he became like the son I never had, I told the room. I shared a few stories, funny ones, the kind you only get by walking through life together, and talked about how those shared experiences made our connection real. And yes, I admitted I was totally caught off guard when he introduced me to his bride for the first time. And now here we were. A full circle. In front of everyone, rewriting the ending that had once been stolen from me. I closed it out with a few simple words. I hope they found everything they were looking for, and then some. The screen went black. What followed next wasn't the calm of resolution. It was an eruption of noise, headlines, and truth that refused to stay buried. Jennifer had made sure of that. The media had a field day. Multiple networks ran the footage and it spread like wildfire. The New York Times ran the front page headline, "The Walking Dead is alive." CNN picked up the story and even reached out to a few of the men I had served with during my time overseas. And what they said floored me. Apparently, they told stories about one night during deployment, a mission that went sideways in the worst way. According to them, we were pinned down and one man, just one, kept firing while the rest tried to get to safety. He launched a barrage into enemy hideouts, hitting concealed bunkers and hillside ambush points. Even after he'd taken hits, 23 in total with 8 considered life-threatening, he kept going. Wouldn't stop. The enemy broke and ran because of his actions. Every man who survived that night swears that he alone saved them all. And now, I was the one standing there, asked to present 2 Purple Hearts and 1 Silver Star on behalf of a man who never saw himself as a hero. It felt surreal. That morning, Jennifer had gotten up early and made breakfast, real breakfast. She whipped up soft eggs, yolks just a little runny with 4 strips of bacon, and she did it like a woman on a mission. The kitchen staff cleared the way, fully aware that she wasn't just cooking. She was cooking for her dad. My own father came in shortly after, while I sat at the table. He pulled out a newspaper and slid it toward me with a half smile. "Thought you might want to see this," he said. He pointed to the headline and I didn't have to read it twice. The coverage was everywhere, radio, TV, the internet. Jennifer leaned over and said, "Dad, that gift you gave last night? The one you didn't want to talk about? If handled right, it'll take care of them for the rest of their lives." She didn't tell me the exact amount, and I didn't ask, but she did mention they were locking it away in investments for at least 5 years. "They don't want to waste it," she added. "They just want to live free." Joan, sitting nearby, barely spoke above a whisper. "Just so you know, everything you uncovered? That was just the beginning. The threads are starting to unravel and no one really knows how deep this goes. But trust me, what people do in the dark eventually gets dragged into the light." I nodded, but my mind drifted elsewhere, toward someone else. Jennifer, with that spark she gets when she's about to stir the pot, gave me a look. "By the way," she said, grinning, "your older daughter? You know, the one who's always seemed a bit guarded? She's got someone in mind." I raised a brow. "She's interested in someone," she said, dragging it out. "Oh yeah?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "You." I nearly spit it out. "Come on," I laughed. "Dad jokes are bad enough. Don't go playing matchmaker now." Jennifer just grinned wider. "I'm just saying she needs someone solid." Someone who knows how to protect what matters. And you? You've already proven you're that guy. Are you trying to set me up? I asked, smirking. I'm old enough to know better, she shot back. You can answer that one for yourself. Then as she stood up from the table she tossed out, she'll be here in an hour. Just thought you'd want a heads up. I laughed, shaking my head. You're impossible. Remember, Dad, age doesn't mean a thing when it comes to the heart. The things a man does for his daughters? That's where the truth really is. I looked over at Joan, now just a piece of the past, and thought about the woman I had once married straight out of high school. I remembered the weight of her father's expectations, the smile she wore on our wedding day, the promises we made. But those memories had long since faded. And then Jennifer, my light, walked over, leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. Thanks, Dad, she said, eyes shimmering. I knew you'd come through. Joanne and I had talked about this before and she felt you'd understand too. You made it possible for her to finally let go of everything that had weighed her down. You helped her step into something new, and for that I owe you. Watching her move forward for the first time in what felt like forever, brought peace not just to her but to all of us. Barbara took the position we discussed and I'll be honest, the change in her was nothing short of remarkable. There was a light in her I hadn't seen before. Her warmth, her genuine loving spirit, it all began to shine through. And it wasn't just a surface change. This was something deeper. For the first time in years she wasn't surviving, she was living. Even my dad, the old lawyer that he is, jumped in to help. He drew up the legal paperwork, power of attorney, so that Judy could step in on Barbara's behalf when needed. It was a simple gesture but it said a lot about where we were headed. The house itself? It was beautiful, solid wood, big windows and a view of the hills, but still something about it felt untouched, unfinished. Barbara said it best. It needs a little heart to make it home. It reminded me of something my mom would have said when I was a kid. Meanwhile, CNN was still digging. After receiving what was supposed to be my death certificate, they uncovered something suspicious. Turns out, the signature on it belonged to a doctor with a sketchy past, someone who was now serving time for fraud. That revelation lit a fire under the media, and soon they had a crew sent out to one of the locations tied to organized crime. That's when Barbara gave me a look, saw the grin on my face and said, "You knew, didn't you?" I nodded. "Yeah," I admitted. "I did." Back at the house, she followed me from the car all the way to the front door. I carried in the groceries and as I set the bags down in the kitchen, she turned to me with that no-nonsense look she gets and said, "All right. You're done. Step aside. I need to do this right." And I did just that. I backed off and let her take the reins. The moment she unpacked the dish soap, she filled the sink, grabbed a sponge and started wiping down every single cabinet before putting anything away. It wasn't about cleaning, it was a ritual, a way of resetting, of claiming the space. Watching her in that moment, I was mesmerized. She arranged the kitchen like it was a part of her, efficient, thoughtful, even graceful. I should have seen the signs of how deeply she needed this, but back then, I was too caught up in the comfort of it all. Too content to ask questions. Later, in the living room we talked through the legal stuff, mainly how Barbara's remarriage meant that the alimony claims against her would be reduced. I told them to move forward with the filings. Barbara agreed, telling me I was making the right call. Then she changed the subject. "I finished measuring the windows," she said, tape measure still in hand. "We need to talk fabric and pricing." "Why the rush?" I asked. "Because this town is growing," she said. "And it won't be long before someone builds a house with a direct view into your bedroom. Curtains add privacy and value." I couldn't argue with that logic. For the next 4 hours, we went room by room, scrolling through online catalogs and placing orders. Barbara had a real eye for detail. We found fabric that matched the woodwork of the log home, warm colors that made the place feel grounded. Thank God the hardware came pre-assembled, it saved us a ton of time. By noon Saturday the guys had arrived, tools and ladders in hand. The 5 of us made quick work of hanging the rods and brackets. Once that was done, we let the women take over the creative part, draping the curtains, tying back the panels. It was one of those rare, wholesome afternoons that leaves you smiling for no reason. I stood back and admired the result. The house looked more lived in, more loved. "I have to admit," I said out loud, "Barbara's got some serious design sense." She blushed at the compliment, turning away with a little laugh, but I caught the smile tugging at her lips. That night, a heavy rain rolled in. I was lying in bed, listening to the drops pound against the metal roof, a sound I've always found oddly comforting, when my bedroom door creaked open. A flash of lightning lit up the room. Barbara stood there in the doorway, wearing a soft, almost sheer nightgown that clung gently to her frame. The light from the storm framed her like something out of a dream. For a moment I forgot everything else. The noise, the past, even the pain. She stepped forward slowly, no words needed. And all I could think was how far we'd both come. I lay still, pretending to be asleep, as Barbara gently pulled back the sheets and crawled into bed beside me. Her body trembled with every crash of thunder that rolled across the hills, the echoes bouncing off the wooden walls of our log home. With the next boom, she pressed herself against me, clinging tightly, seeking comfort. And I gave it, silently, instinctively. The storm passed eventually, but the moment lingered. The next morning, while I was making coffee, she picked up the letter I had left on the counter. She scanned the first page, her eyes moving slowly, and then flipped to the second. It was the legal certificate, the final confirmation. My divorce was officially complete. She looked up at me, tears welling with joy. I didn't say anything. I just walked over and wrapped her in my arms, holding her the way I had so many times before, but this time, there was nothing left between us but honesty. "Is it time to meet my parents?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yeah, it is." Without wasting a minute, she picked up the phone and called her mother. She asked if the family was still doing their traditional Labor Day gathering at the farm. Her mom's excitement was palpable, even I could hear it from across the room. When she told her she'd be coming home this year, and bringing someone, her mom was over the moon. They even decided to move the gathering to Sunday to make sure everyone would be there. Later that week we packed the truck and headed out. Our first stop was the local Legion, just a couple of drafts to settle the nerves. That's where I met her father, Roy, though everyone in town still called him Bullfrog. He was the kind of man you knew instantly not to mess with, but his handshake was warm and his eyes were kind. He leaned back on his stool and said, "So, you finalized that divorce, son?" "I did," I replied. "A long time coming." I told him how I'd met his daughter, how things had unfolded between us, and how fast it all had moved. He didn't need much convincing. He already knew enough about me, my service, my background, my character. That was good enough for him. When we walked into the next room, he proudly introduced me to everyone as his future son-in-law. Someone asked him how he got the name Bullfrog, and before he could answer, I beat him to it. "He was our drill sergeant back in the Corps," I said. Had a voice that could knock birds out of trees. Everyone laughed. That day was special for Barbara. She later admitted it had been years since she'd seen her entire family so proud. And she was right. They were glowing. Of course, they also made it their mission to get me drunk. I didn't stand a chance. I have no idea how we made it back to the hotel. I barely remembered half the night. The next morning, I groaned as I tried to sit up. Did I embarrass myself? I asked her. She grinned, sipping her coffee. "You outlasted the other two guys." "But barely." As I stumbled into the shower, she laughed and said it served me right. I told myself then and there, never again. That was the last time I'd let her family drink me under the table. Over breakfast, she told me something else. "The board offered me a position," she said. "It's not just a title either. I'll actually get a voice." Meanwhile, on the legal front, everything had finally come full circle. After that media firestorm surrounding the forged death certificate, the courts made their final ruling. Every change made to my trust during my false death was illegal and void. The court awarded James and Madison, my brother and ex-wife, only 19% of the current trust value. And any personal property they wanted? They'd have to buy it back at full market value, if I agreed to sell it. That ruling hit them hard. But I didn't gloat. I simply instructed my attorneys to negotiate the terms and close the door on that chapter of my life. I later heard a phrase that stuck with me. Sometimes we all have to pay for one person's greed. I remember asking aloud more than once, what did James really do during those 3 years he lived in my home, besides stab me in the back? And then there was that infamous thing Madison used to say to our daughter, trying to explain away the betrayal. "Your dad's story? It's a sad one. But at least it brought Uncle James into our lives. They used to gut me. But now I had the truth. Now I had her." I looked her in the eye and said it coldly, my voice steady and firm. "Was there ever a single thing you told me that was 100% true?" The room was dead quiet. Jennifer, Judy, and Joe had already heard everything. The judge had been right to ask questions. What she didn't know was that her father had already received the video I recorded, before the judge ever called him. He texted me directly after watching it and asked us not to take any action until he arrived. Within the hour, his private jet was in the air. He heard the entire conversation on playback during the flight. According to Jennifer, even he was stunned into silence. And when he landed, he made it clear he felt just like I did. That everything had been orchestrated. A setup. One that put not only our family but reputations, careers, and futures at risk. If the truth came out, it would destroy them all. And they knew it. When Jennifer finished hearing the last of it, she didn't hesitate. She demanded that we all take DNA tests to find out if everything we thought we knew was even real. It was around 2 a.m. when Barbara quietly slipped into my room. I felt the mattress dip and then her arms around me. "I couldn't sleep without you," she whispered. I smiled in the dark. It's little moments like this that make us feel young. She didn't say anything, just nestled closer. I pulled her into my arms and held her there. When she noticed the tears in my eyes, she tilted her head and asked gently, "Why are you crying?" I swallowed hard. Because for the first time, I think I understand what it means to be truly loved. That became one of those rare memories, precious and unforgettable. The kind that slips into your soul and never lets go. It must have touched her too, because suddenly Barbara was crying as well. Later that week, I made the mistake of telling her sisters about that video, the infamous one. Of course, it opened the floodgates for teasing. They wouldn't let me hear the end of it. Steve even got Barbara to send him a copy so he could forward it to his dad. Amidst the laughter and chaos, Barbara mentioned we'd barely had time to see family since the first of the month. Between her new position and the construction of the garage addition, our schedules had been jammed. She told them it should be finished by the end of the month. It was a serious upgrade, 4 full bays, a massive enclosed storage space in the back, and a 3-bedroom apartment above it. We even had a covered walkway connecting it to the main house. We were building something real. Something lasting. But sometimes, even in moments like that, the past tries to slip in. When her 2 sisters brought up how much things had changed, I silently braced myself. I figured this would turn into one more thing she'd eventually find a way to blame me for. I didn't know it then, but that suspicion would end up being more accurate than I could have imagined. Sensing the shift in mood, Barbara lightened things up by pulling the ladies aside to help her pick dress colors for the big day. They laughed, flipping through swatches and samples. That's when I chimed in from the hallway. "Don't worry about me. I'll be in black." They all turned toward me, puzzled. "Why black?" someone asked. I gave a half smile, shrugged, and said, "It's the color you wear when you're mourning a loss." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you losing, Dad?" I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room, the family, the noise, the rebuilding, and then I quietly said, "The old life. The one I thought I had. And maybe, just maybe, the man I used to be." I replied without missing a beat, "My freedom." The whole room groaned. My dad chuckled as I grabbed a cold beer from the fridge and headed out onto the porch. He followed me with that knowing look, the one that says, "You're in deeper than you think." I could hear my mom in the background already giving input on the wedding details. Dad tried to push back on something, but Mom shut it down quick. That was the end of that argument. Funny thing, ever since her teenage years, Mom's friends used to call her Sarge. And standing there, watching Barbara run the wedding planning committee like a 5-star general, I realized something unsettling. I was marrying my mother's clone. Barb had the final word on everything. And honestly, I didn't mind. It just made me laugh. Somewhere deep inside, it reinforced how different things were this time around. And it got me thinking, maybe Joan and I had never actually been in love. Not the real kind. Not like this. As we flew home from visiting Barb's folks, she casually mentioned that her parents were flying out to visit us next week. "Your mom wants to talk venue options," she added with a grin. "Oh yeah?" I asked. "Since when?" She said it's a surprise, Barb replied, eyes twinkling. We landed at the airstrip a little before 2 in the afternoon. As we watched a sleek little 6-seater jet come in, I learned something new about my dad. He flies his own plane. He and Mom stepped out looking sharp as ever, like they just stepped out of a magazine shoot for Retired and Thriving. We got them settled into the guest house, popped open a few beers and caught up. A little while later, Barb's parents pulled in. I handed the keys to my old Ford truck to Gloria and let her drive while I rode shotgun. My future mother-in-law cracked a smile when she slid behind the wheel. "You had a storm, didn't you?" she asked knowingly. Barb looked over at me with a little smirk and said, "Yeah, he used to crawl into bed with us during those." I caught the double meaning instantly, and so did my parents. They both burst out laughing. It was the kind of teasing only family can get away with, and I didn't mind it one bit. Over the next few days, while Gloria and Bull took some time exploring the island, my parents, John and Sylvia, quietly began house hunting. We hadn't said anything to Bull yet about our plans. Gloria wanted to get a read on how he felt about the area before we laid it all out. On the drive back from the farm we finally asked him, "So, when are you two moving into town?" I said casually. He hesitated. "We haven't really talked about it, to be honest. Not sure I like the idea of neighbors being just 200 yards away." "Why not?" Barb asked. "Charlie and I were wondering, would you ever consider moving here? Helping us run the bar?" He looked over, surprised. "We've got the in-law suite above it. You'd have your own space. And we'd start you at $60,000 a year. All we're asking is that you think about it." To say he was floored would be an understatement. He promised he'd give it serious thought. We didn't push. We told him to take his time and let us know when he was ready. Gloria, on the other hand, was already half-packing. She said she liked the idea of settling in a place where life felt slower, quieter. She looked around our newly finished bar, Bullfrogs as we'd begun to call it, and said, "You know, life really is better the second time around." And standing there watching our parents sip beers, laugh like kids again and find peace in the spaces we built, I believed her. Thanks for listening. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Have you ever stayed silent when your heart was breaking? Would you have done the same? And hey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We've got more stories to tell. Some messy, some healing, all human. See you in the next one.